I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on GBN, we're stepping into a high stakes military thriller ripped from real world headlines. The name of the book, Broken Eagle Flashpoint. It is written by a terrific author. His name is Dr. Stan Flemming. And in the book, he reveals a shocking wartime drama where deception, betrayal, and integrity collide. Inside the U.S. Army during the Kosovo conflict, based on a true story, this explosive novel exposes how one fraudulent officer nearly unraveled a command and how those who dared to tell the truth risked everything. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him on TV today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below this interview. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure to have you on the show. What first inspired you to turn this true military incident into a novel?
You know, it actually began with when I was with friends, and I used to tell them that I was working actually on a different book at the time. But after the deployment into Kosovo, I shared some of the things that had occurred there, and overwhelmingly people said, you know, you really need to write about that event. I said, but I really want to write about something different. And they said, no, you need to write about this event. So I put that book on hold, sat down and started writing this one. And one chapter led to the next. And finally, we had a novel out of that.
Wonderful, wonderful. How much of William Weston's character is drawn from real events or real people?
The characters in all of the events are all real. The one thing that we had to do to publish the book was change the names of the characters. It was a requirement that came from the Pentagon uh, before we could release that book. So when you look at the events that Weston in this story portrayed, they were all real.
Were you serving in the military during this era?
I was. At the time that this occurred, I was actually the task force commander for the medical command out in Kosovo during that time.
Amazing. What shocked you most about the magnitude of the deception he pulled off?
I think that what got my attention was his ability to so effectively infiltrate the military system, uh, to be able to work his way through uh, gaining a senior rank by fraudulent approaches, his ability to reach out and touch some of the most senior ranking military folks at the time, and do it in such a way that he just would slip through the cracks every time. You know, he went from military post to military post, always one step ahead of the law. Every time it came to a point where he was about to get caught, he managed to slip away to another command. I recall one day when I was talking to a commander in Iraq about, can you validate this officer? And her response to me was, how did he get to your command? We just tried to have him arrested in ours and he disappeared. And I said, well, he showed up here and he has orders, but we never really could validate anything. We couldn't validate his credentials as a physician. We couldn't validate his rank, his senior rank, or his security clearance. And yet he seemed to be highly efficient in fraudulently making these documents. And I think as this investigation unfolded, and things were not going very well at our end and trying to get the military's attention, I turned to the state, back to California, where I had served on their board, a licensing board, and I said, hey, have you ever heard of this doc? And do you have any information that would help me? And to my shock and amazement, they sent me a box of documents where this individual either had been indicted or had been sentenced or was on the run from a state for forgery documents. He was always one step ahead of the law. He was wanted at the time, I believe it was in 11 or 15 states. and had been convicted in quite a few of those, but he just stayed one step ahead of the law each time. And was able to get overseas in the military because there is a law that says if you're serving abroad in the military, the states can't touch you. So he knew that. And so that's how he ended up out in Kosovo with us.
Amazing. He completely gamed the system. So let me ask you, what does this reveal about vulnerabilities inside military bureaucracy? And do you think it could happen nowadays with all of the digital aspects of verifications in place?
I think since this event had happened, the military certainly has tightened things up. And I think using the digital age technology that we have now probably would reduce some of the likelihood. Now, when I looked back at this individual's credentials, and when anytime a physician comes in the military, their credentials have to be what we call prime source verified. And so we went to the credential analyst at the time and said, do you remember this officer? And did you prime source verify their credentials? Because when we went to the institutions to which this person allegedly had been a part of, they couldn't validate. They had no knowledge of this person. And finally, the gal broke down and said, it was a busy day when he showed up. He was so smooth. He was so kind. He volunteered to help me upload his documents, so I didn't have time to verify them. But he was a senior ranking officer, so I had no reason to doubt him. So I went along with what he told me was true. So it was a human vulnerability, if you will, that allowed him to have his credentials at least recognized in the system. Same for his rank. When he realized, his first documentation was he made himself a lieutenant colonel and realized when he went into the Pentagon, he was told by someone, hey, if you were a full colonel, you would be able to have more access. And so he magically promoted himself to colonel and had those documents uploaded at the time. So, if it hadn't been for an astute young major, and that's how this all began, was with a very young major in our command who said, there's something wrong with this individual's credentials. And I, as a commander, did not believe him at the time because I said, hey, the military verifies everything. There's no way this person could be in this position, have these credentials, unless the military had approved it. And this young major said, I understand the system, but he goes, there's something wrong here. And he took it upon himself really to do the digging, looking for the evidence, and then bringing it forth and saying, hey, everything here is bogus. If he hadn't done that, that guy would have slipped through the crack one more time. It was, when you're trying to fight a war and you're trying to maintain peace and you're taking care of casualties, to have the magnitude of this, where this reached into his operation that he did, reached into some of the highest ranks of the military and to some members of Congress. It was not only a major distractor, but certainly one that the military just did not want to deal with at the time. So that's what made this whole story more attention getting, because you had this huge case that was just evolving, and the military's response was bury it, make it go away, and pretend it never happened.
Right. Right. Well, some things are too embarrassing to own up to, and this might have been one of them. Let me ask you this, the why behind it. Why did he put on this big charade? Is he a psychopath? What kind of psychological traits allow someone like Weston to thrive in deception?
I would speculate he had more of a narcissistic personality,
Hmm.
and one in which he had to feed his own ego. When I sat down with him to have the conversations, it was, you couldn't actually get to him unless you acknowledged he was a great person. He was a senior ranking person in the military. He had all these, you had to acknowledge these self appointed accolades to actually get to the guy. But as our inspector general told me one time when I was speaking with her, and she said, that guy talks so smooth that he makes you want to do what he wants you to do.
Hmm.
And that is characteristic of a narcissistic sociopath, if you will,
Yeah.
is they can get you to move in any direction that they want you to move, and you would do it willingly, not knowing whether it's right or wrong
Yeah.
at the time.
What do you think his motivation is? Why did he do it?
I think his initial motivation was, at least from what I saw on the paper trails that we found, was, he found some kind of recognition in being a physician.
Hmm.
A majority of his forgeries and documentations all had to do with um, medical legal issues in the states in which he would try to practice as a physician until he was found to be fraudulent, and then he'd move on to another state and try and repeat the same thing over and over again. I honestly believe that he thought he was running out of states, quite frankly, to operate in, and somehow he found out about the military, and that seemed to be a safe haven if he could access it. And he was smart. The guy, was, I have to give it to him, he was incredibly smart, to be able to navigate the systems the way he did. I'll never forget one day. I went into a top secret briefing, for senior leaders, and I happened to go to my desk, and he was sitting at my desk in this briefing, and I said, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
And he said, oh, I figured you were busy and I would sit in for you. And I said, I didn't ask you to do that. And I said, and first of all, number one, I didn't authorize you to sit in for me. And I said, number two, you can't be here. You don't have the credentials. Because I knew what his credentials and his clearance was. And so I went back to the sergeant that was clearing everyone to come in that room that day. And I said, did you clear this officer to be in here? And he said, well, I couldn't find him on the roster and I couldn't find his credentials, but he convinced me that he had them and he was here on your behalf. And I said, no. I said, this guy has no credentials to be at this level of a briefing. You get him out of here. You escort him out of here now.
Amazing.
But that's how good this guy was.
Right. And it sounds like he enjoyed the thrill of just doing things like that. How far could he go before being detected? Did he have any medical skills? What did he have any medical training? What type of procedures did he participate in while posing as a doctor?
That's a great question. And how he maneuvered through the system is, when you look at all the specialties in medicine, most of those require you to have those type of skills to, at some point or another, to be able to do either major or minor surgery, or manage patients in a more intensive environment. He chose psychiatry. And interestingly enough, in psychiatry, your first skill is you just got to listen to people, right? Um, where he ran into difficulty was out in the combat zone. You've got soldiers who are under an enormous amount of stress. So psychiatry helps in terms of the listening piece, but you also end up prescribing. And so he was prescribing, for all these soldiers he was caring for. And I started getting complaints from other doctors and other folks saying, all these patients that he sees are actually getting worse, not better on their medications. And so at some point I said, maybe we need to have a peer review on this doctor to validate that he knows what he's doing. So I requested a peer review from the Army, and they turned me down the first time. And then I came back and I appealed again and said, look, I can't do the peer review because that would be biased, as the commander. So I really need a person from outside the command to do this peer review. And finally, after appealing and appealing, they did send a highly qualified individual who came in, did the peer review, and in his report, he said, this doctor does not function even at the first year medical student level. Um, and at which point we revoked his credentials at that point and said, look, you can't see any more patients. But so no, so he did not have the skill set to be functioning as a physician who can prescribe medications and manage complex patients.
Amazing. We're almost out of time, but I got to ask you this. Catch Me If You Can, of course, was a hit movie with Leonardo DiCaprio based on a real life story where a man posed in many different roles in life, including an airline captain.
Mm-hmm.
Have you envisioned Broken Eagle Flashpoint as a film?
Uh, I think if someone were to ever pick that up and make a film, it would certainly keep the audience on the edge of their
Yeah,
seat because it has so many twists and turns in that you just don't expect.
yeah.
And I think it would be a fascinating film. But for me to have that vision, I don't think that's in my wheelhouse. I'd leave that up to the experts who make movies and write those type of scripts. But I think it certainly would catch a good audience attention
I
because it
agree.
really is a thriller.
It's a fascinating story with so many layers. It's almost inconceivable that this happened, but it did happen, and you've
Yeah.
novelized it, and the names have been changed to protect the innocent and the not so innocent, and you've done a great job with this. The name of the book is Broken Eagle Flashpoint. It is a gripping, true to life military thriller that'll have you scratching your head that you won't believe that this actually happened, but the bottom line is it did. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Logan, thanks so much for having me.
I appreciate your time, your insight, the wonderful work on this book, and your candor to the folks at home. I'm Logan Crawford for the Global Book Network. So long for now.